Need windscreen wipers for you guys.
Ever wondered what it takes to brew a real craft beer in a real brewery that actually sells beer to real people? Today, I'm tearing down the walls and giving you an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at how JKB Brewing's first ever commercial batch of craft beer was born. This isn't just any ordinary brew day, it's the start of something legendary. Not only will I show you how the magic happens, but I'll also share the crazy complexities and challenges of commercial brewing. Trust me, it's a whole new ballgame compared to home brewing, so stick around because you won't want to miss a single moment of this epic journey. Hey everyone, welcome back to JKB Brewing. Today is a monumental day because we're brewing our first ever commercial pilot batch of our first beer, F-Wit, a dark wit beer. It's dark and it's witty and it's full of wit. And we are doing it right here at Local Brewing Co. We've teamed up with these fantastic folks to bring our unique craft beer vision to life on a professional scale. This isn't just any beer. It's a special dark wheat beer based on a homebrew recipe that's close to my heart. It's my absolute favourite beer from all my homebrewing adventures, and nothing has ever matched the mind-blowing experience of that first sip, except for a few beers. If you've been following the channel, you'll remember the dark wheat beer we brewed a few weeks ago. Today, we're scaling it up to be bigger and better. I've made a few tweaks to make sure it shines on this professional system, so stay tuned to see how those changes go in action. And if you missed the homebrew video, there's a link in the comments below. After waking up at stupid o'clock in the morning, I arrived at Local Brewing Co. while it was still half dark. After struggling with their cafe's coffee grinder for the perfect brew, we were ready to go. I was hoping the challenges with the coffee grinder weren't an omen for the Brewday, but seeing the barista's meticulous attention to detail gave me hope. It reflected the same precision and care that head brewer Andrew brought to the brewing day through the brewing of my beer. Andrew's expertise and passion was inspiring. With years of craft brewing experience, it was incredible to talk shop all day. I learnt a lot from his approach to brewing and saw the differences between home brewing and commercial brewing. His epic brewing spreadsheet put mine to shame. Talk about being a freak in the sheets. His attention to detail was next level. One of the biggest eye-openers was the focus on hitting exact specifications for each batch. Constant monitoring and measuring were crucial to ensure the intended gravity was achieved. At home, I'm a bit more relaxed about hitting target gravities once Brewday starts. There is usually home life and family to contend with simultaneously, and my end goal is usually to end up with a full volume of great tasting beer. But in commercial brewing, consistency and delivering what customers expect are key. It's all about building that trust, and I certainly trust them with my beer. We brewed on a small 500 litre system. It's small for commercial brewing, but massive compared to home brewing. Roughly 50 times the size of the batch I usually make at home. This system includes a combined mash tun and boil kettle with a lauter tun sitting on top. Grains are mashed in the tun below, and then the grains with the wort are pumped into the lauter tun, where the wort is allowed to drain so that it can be separated from the grain. The wort is drained back into the tun at the bottom, where it is boiled. After boiling with hops, the wort is cooled and then transferred to fermenters. We started with the grinding of malt, a lot of malt, at least compared to the usual 2 or 3 kilograms I usually work with. Today, we were using over 100 kilos. We're using Pilsner malt to provide a nice clean base for our beer. It's the canvas that lets all the other flavours shine through. Pale wheat malt, since we're making wheat beer, no wheat means no beer. This malt adds subtle sweetness, a grainy texture, and a fuller mouthfeel. It also provides sugars for the yeast to ferment. We also added flaked wheat, which is rolled unmalted wheat that helps with head retention and adds a crisp, sharp note to the beer. It also gives a creamy, velvety, fuller mouthfeel that adds layers of complexity. Finally, the star of the show, roasted wheat malt. This is the ultimate roasted grain. Ever had a dark beer so harsh and bitter it felt like sucking on 10 tea bags and left your mouth drier than a desert? You won't get any of that with roasted wheat. It delivers smooth and clean chocolate, coffee and roasted grain flavours without the harsh bitterness. If you want an insight into what I'm trying to achieve with this beer and how I am trying to make it stand out amongst the competition, check out the taste test comparing the homebrew version of this beer to some commercial examples of dark wheat beer. Links to that tasting and the homebrew video are in the comments below. One of the main concerns was the high amount of wheat and the potential for it to cause the wort to get stuck while draining during lautering. Wheat does not have a husk, so it can become compact. We added rice hulls to make the grain bed more porous. This is a concern that I don't have to worry about at home as I use a brew in a bag. I was a bit nervous that the beer may get stuck or just take days to drain. Despite this and the potential challenges, Andrew was excited to brew something different and to see how a wheat beer would perform on this system for the first time. So, how did Lautering and Sparging go? Firstly, let me give a shout out to local Brewing Co for inviting me to the Brewday and Andrew for showing me the ropes. They're a certified independent craft brewery based in Melbourne, Australia, and have been instrumental in getting me started. They're driven by the belief that alcohol can be a force for good. They tackle food waste and create positive social impact in creative ways. Plus, they have a carbon neutral taproom, and if you're in the area, definitely check them out. Mash water is preheated to just above the mash temperature to account for any heat loss when it is pumped through the system and mixed with the grains. At home, heating 15 litres is no big deal, but here we're working with 600 litres. Also, a major concern is scorching the grains, which I'll touch on in a minute. We also added brewing salts to get the right water profile. If you seasoned your steak with this amount, your blood pressure would definitely feel it. Certainly a lot more than the couple of grams I use at home. This step is crucial to ensure the mash has the right conditions for brewing. I'm aiming for 5% ABV with this beer, a bit stronger than the 4% homebrew version. This beer's unique profile needs enough flavour to make a real impact, and I believe the 4% does, but I also envisage that this is a beer that you'd try out of curiosity rather than for a big session at a pub. But who knows, maybe in 20 years time it'll be the most popular beer in the world. Anyway, dreams aside, we added the crushed grains and started the mash. Unlike my homebrew, where grains are just dumped in, here we well pulled them to ensure even distribution. We used a single temperature step in the mash to avoid burning the grains. Apparently, this type of system can burn grains when using the heating elements, which we definitely do not want to do. And to make sure everything went smoothly, we monitored the mash pH regularly. At home, I usually skip this step, but it's crucial here to keep the enzymes active and ensure the sugars are fermentable. It is probably the next step in improving my homebrew game that I intend to implement. Towards the end of the mash, we pumped hot water into the lauter tun to warm it up, minimizing temperature loss of the wort before we pumped the wort and grains into it. Once the mash was done, the wort and grain were pumped into the lauter tun. The wort was recirculated to help clear it up as it drained. Given how dark the beer was, it was tricky to see. After clearing, the wort was allowed to drain while hot water was sprayed onto the grain bed to wash off all the sugars in a sparge. The water temp had to be below 78 to avoid extracting any tannins which would make the beer bitter. It took about 3 hours for the wort to drain from the lauter tun to the boil kettle. We measured the gravity of the wort going into the boil kettle constantly. If it looked like it was going to be too low, we could adjust by cutting lautering short, and if it was going to be too high, we could dilute it with water. Fortunately, there was no stuck lauter, thanks to the rice hulls. Boil went for an hour, and yes, it did take a lot longer to heat the wort up to boiling temp than it does at home. I added Moteca hops, aiming for 20 IBUs of gentle bitterness, though we calculated we should end up with about 17 IBUs. It was shockingly noticeable, that difference. Just kidding, such a small difference in IBU is difficult to detect.
Need
Hops in my own beer.
need windscreen wipers for your glasses now.
I do need windscreen wipers for my glasses.
Bitterness is just enough to balance the sweetness without overpowering the beer. As I am aiming for mild bitterness in this beer, where hops are not on show, I did ask because I wanted to know whether it was better to look at using higher alpha acid bittering hops. This would mean using less hops and thus reducing brewing costs. Interestingly, another strategy that they sometimes use is not just use the cheapest bittering hops, but choose the hops where using the whole bag will provide the required IBUs. The way I understand, this is more efficient for bespoke brews like mine, as leftover hops cannot always be used. The alpha acid of the hops doesn't always match what is quoted, just like what happened to me when we brewed the Grudziszka on the channel. During the boil, we constantly measured gravity, ensuring we hit our target. At home, I do leave it up to the beer gods once brew starts, but here, it's all about precision. I did ask about whether IBUs are measured in the industry. Andrew explained that some places do and some places don't. It involves a chemical solution and takes up to about 3 hours to set up, so it isn't something easy to do. Exactly knowing the IBUs isn't something that is really that important, as taste is subjective at the end of the day. My take is that it depends on how much money you really have to spend on it and whether you want to go to the lengths for the ultra consistency. I think slight variations between batches just adds a bit of charm to craft beer. To me, craft beer is not about monotonous sameness. We added brewing salts after the boil to balance the final beer profile. This was a new technique for me. The salts added before the mash are used to ensure mash pH, but they can be absorbed by the grains and not necessarily make it all the way to the final beer. By adding them post-boil, this impacts the final beer more significantly. The fermenters were pre-cleaned before Brewday. Before transferring the beer, hot water was run through the fermenter and all connections to ensure that they were sanitized. We monitored the temperature carefully and could adjust the flow through the heat exchanger to change it, increasing or decreasing the flow to increase or decrease the temperature of the wort going into the fermenter. The fermenters are also connected to glycol to help control the temperature during fermentation as well. Finally, we pitched a legitimate brick of yeast. You could almost make a house from it. For the commercial version of this beer, I've used Belgian wheat beer yeast instead. Sure, there were some supply constraints, but don't worry about that. Let's just focus on the important part. It's full of wit. This yeast not only means the beer can be witty and funny, but it also brings the premium quality of Belgian beers, which are some of the best in the world. Belgian yeast is what gives Belgian beers that unique and sought after taste, and we're excited to have that character in our beer. So when and where can you get this beer? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. The initial batch will be 8 to 9 50-litre kegs, making their way to a venue soon. Subscribe to the channel and follow along to be the first to know how this beer tastes and how it compares to the homebrew version we made recently. If you're a venue in Australia, get in touch with the email below to know how you can get your hands on this unique brew, because I've got an amazing offer for you. Did I mention free beer? In the meantime, check out some of the other beers I've brewed on the channel, or perhaps this epic adventure here that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy.
Until next time, cheers.
The same. To walk like two out the door, then you have magic.